Yes, so I'll call this meeting to order under the virtual meeting guidelines that we established on the 18th of May because of the pandemic crisis. Does anybody have anything that they need to say, any announcements or anything like that before we actually jump into the meat of this?
Hi, Lisa.
Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday.
There you go,
And
Lisa.
happy budget meeting day. Is this budget meeting day?
No. This is 5-year plan, Lisa.
5-year plan day. Y'all, I have 6 meetings today, and I think you're the third. So
It's going to be the
pardon me for not knowing where I am or what I am meant to be doing.
Okay. All right. So would everybody like for David to share this outline that I made and sent out to everybody when the meeting was first called? Or do you have copies of it that you can refer to? What would you prefer to do?
Let's share it maybe. That way everybody's looking at the same thing.
All right. Just makes it a little harder to see people. So if you want to say something and I haven't recognized you, it's because I don't know that you want to say something. Raise your hand and you move up to the top of the pile. Okay, so we'll try to go through this just as quickly and efficiently as possible. The one thing I wanted to say in the outset is that the one really notable accomplishment that we managed to get through in 20 and 21 was getting the Nelson Library expansion and renovation completed. We're almost there. We still have some things that are on back order, I think, in terms of equipment, but I hope that everybody has a chance to see it who hasn't already seen it, because it's really wonderful. And so I'm going to kind of skip over that because I think in terms of what David did and what a lot of the staff did to contribute to that was amazing. And we all recognize that that's there and a great accomplishment. Okay, looking at goal number 1, which is for access and outreach. Annually, the 5-year plan said that we would compare service metrics using BiblioCommons data. I frankly haven't really seen that, David. I know that we have it on the agenda for the next meeting, and I think that's great and should be good going forward. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else to be said about that?
It's frustrating, and we'll talk about it at the full board meeting, because sometimes it's a bit of apples to oranges, the way that different libraries report different things. But I'll go through that at the full board meeting to show, what's available to us in order to meet this goal. JMRL's reporting has been pretty static for a long time in terms of our circulation and things like that. We use the same methods for collecting them that Josh collects the circulation the same way that I did prior to him and Phil Williams did prior to that for the most part. But some other libraries tend to bounce around. So at any rate, we'll have a CE about Bibliostat at your board meeting in later this month.
Okay, great. The second thing that was to be done annually was to use output and outcome data to provide and evaluate a range of programming services. I know that we've been keeping up with attendees and the number of programs that have been offered, even through the pandemic virtually, as the staff has really done an amazing job to produce. But I didn't know whether we were actually using any methods for evaluating the success of the different programs other than the number of people who attended.
I think this is still a work in progress. Our programming committee has been working on this for a while. Sarah Hamfeld was working on PLA's project outcome as a potential tool for this, but without Sarah here, that hasn't been picked up. So yeah, we have not accomplished this goal and need to work on it. Okay.
Is there any person who might be in line to do this? I know we have Sarah's position advertised, and that's going to be a big hole until it's filled.
Yeah, I mean, that's the role of that position, basically, is to be the head of that programming committee. They're not all alone in doing that work. There are other folks on that committee, but we're counting on that position as being the spearhead for that.
Is there a way of generating some data in the interim on the programs? Any sort of evaluation that could be done?
In terms of the outputs that we were looking for, so the way that Sarah would describe it are things like an outcome is, 20 people came. An output, we're looking for people to say, like, because of this program, I learned how to do X, or I came in seeking this and I left with that. And currently, we don't have a method for collecting that kind of data, especially in the virtual format. For the past year, all the data that we have now is raw data. It's numbers of attendees, and even that can be difficult to get in the virtual setting because we've got the attendees at that point of contact, and then we also need to look at who's viewing later and to figure out for Bibliostat what period of time we're going to consider that to be in attendance. And then also if we hook in social media, we just started this, but doing Facebook Live for programming as well, we need to be able to count that. So all we have right now are numbers.
I think in this interim, it's disappointing not to be able to sort of get something ready to be in place for an evaluation plan other than the numbers. But there, from your point of view, there just really doesn't seem to be a way to do that, to move forward on that.
Yeah, I don't have something lined up for this, Marcy. I think the programming committee is going to have to work on this moving forward. In the past, we have tried surveys of some sort, and that's something that we haven't tried in the virtual environment. But we could do that, some sort of like, if you enjoyed this, or take the time to fill this out afterwards to try and get that kind of data. Without somebody in that position, though, we don't have a point of contact to collect that data for us and to kind of synthesize. So yeah, definitely this is a goal that needs some work.
Okay.
And just from my standpoint on the outside, dropping into this whole thing, the data that you get from such surveys and that kind of thing is always weighted. The people who want to reply are the ones who do, and the vast majority of folks, say, yeah, it was good, thank you. So I agree with David that really needs an in-depth look at the best way to gather that in order to be able to use it effectively. So it's hard.
And I agree with the most recent comment. And this question of, we know, of course, we care about data and information. That's what libraries care about. But I think it's also worth mentioning that how weighted they are, and also trying to understand about how can we, the objective isn't to collect data. The objective is to harness this information in a way to make programming better. And I think that one thing I believe that the JMRL has done in 2020 has found a way to offer all sorts of programming in ways that perhaps aren't yet measured by, data or surveys, but they have certainly been doing that. And so I think that that's kind of important to consider that in the context of the time. And I think that, yes, you could do a quick Google form or SurveyMonkey or whatever, and folks might just do that because, we do so much online now. But I think it's also worth acknowledging that the programming, at least for 2020, has been pretty remarkable, not just in the context of where we are, but just, solid, I think.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Lisa. But I think one of the things that it's taught us is how much more we might be able to reach out to the community by doing things, at least in part virtually. And getting some feedback on that is going to be really important to see whether the in-house programming really should take the weight, or whether people are really using and appreciating and wanting to engage with some of the online resources more.
And that's been a big topic of conversation, both in terms of Josh and I've been talking about it on the tech end, and we've been talking about something along those lines for years. Actually, Meredith first brought this to my attention many years ago about the fact that, we have this content that people are interested in, but prior to relatively recently, it was kind of locked into a room in a building somewhere. And we might be able to have 75 people in for a program, but there might be 500 people that are interested in viewing it. So I think you're absolutely right. Both of you are right there. The goal here is really to figure out how to make sure we're providing the best programming that people are looking for, and the data is a means to an end for that. But also we're going to have to figure out not just is it virtual or is it in person, but like how are we going to do the hybrid of those two so you can both come to story time, and if you're at home that day with your child, you can watch story time.
Right. Okay, so we will put that down as under active investigation in terms of follow-up.
I like that.
Marcy, this is Susan, can I add a
Sure,
comment here? It would be really nice to, while we're doing virtual programming, if there was a way, and I don't know that there is, that we can collect the data as far as where these people are that are attending virtual programs. What groups are we not reaching virtually? Just to throw that out.
And Susan, I think the only way we could do that is by asking. I don't think there's a way that we could see from Troomba or from Facebook, you know, what the, where somebody's from based on their IP addresses. I think that's pretty locked down. So that would have to be some sort of survey or something. But that's, you know, we can certainly talk about just coming up with something generic that we could throw at the back of all virtual programming for the next, you know, for the foreseeable future while we're doing that, that's available for people. You know, as we're mentioning it, I'm surprised that we haven't actually done so already, but.
One of the simple things you might do is just ask people to put in their zip code. That would give you at least a gross idea about where they are relative to where we know services are and are not. Is there anybody else who wanted to jump in on this particular?
I'd like to hear Evan's thoughts on it as a, you know, doing a lot of programming in the virtual environment here.
Yeah, I mean, the nearest thing we have when you sign up on Troomba, you get home libraries, which can kind of help, but that doesn't necessarily pinpoint anything. But I agree. I think it would be very useful to see if we could somehow get a zip code. I know we've also had people joining us from all around the country, which is kind of interesting too, and probably good to share that we're not only are we, you know, providing for our service area, but we're actually reaching people. We had somebody from Georgia at a program who's thinking about moving to Charlottesville, and they wanted to kind of, you know, get a feel for what's going on. So yeah, and again, David, I mean, I'd be happy to try to come up, maybe Abby and I can, or anybody can come up with some possible questions we could send at the end of a program, a link or something, and people just really probably short, we probably don't want to ask too much, and just get some of that basic information for the time being until we get a better grasp on the BiblioCommons.
Let's have a talk about that. I like it. And I don't think that would be that time intensive, and we could just have one form that's available for all programmers to put on a slide or something, or just have a slide that's available for folks. Okay.
Okay, moving on. Some of the goals that were specifically slated for fiscal year 2020, which ended in June 2020, were to explore adding non-registration requiring programming and early literacy story times in each branch. Is there any, before the shutdown? Yeah, before the shutdown, how was that going?
This is complete. Yes, every branch has at least one non-registration early literacy story time.
Okay, great.
This was directly, this goal was directly from the feedback that we got during our surveying for the 5-year plan. And it was specifically directed at one location that didn't have any. We got it a few times, and that location is now offering that.
Okay, that's great. And we obviously have all of the online programming, which is
right. Yeah, that's
registration. So
right, no registration.
As long as we can keep that up, it really adds to the availability.
Some of those, it's interesting though. Some are registration, you know, because there are interactive components and you can't have too many folks. But we do have the capacity to record anything and have it available immediately after as well.
Right. Plus, a lot of them really are open.
Yeah.
The second thing was to conduct a comprehensive review of the JMRL policy manual, and I will be happy to tell you that that is underway. In the sense that dividing the policy manual into something that's appropriate for the board and the higher levels of administration, and something that really is for staff, is being actively worked on right now. And hopefully over the next year and a half or so, we will make a lot of progress and complete that aim. Does anybody else have any comments about either of those two? Good. So it looks like we're doing pretty well there. For fiscal year 2021, which is our current year, develop a public engagement strategy for services and programs, including outreach to current non-users. Now, I'm certainly aware of how the library has advertised easy online library cards and really tried to advertise their programming readily on the website. But are there other things that are underway for that, or has that really had to be put on hold during the pandemic?
Unfortunately, a lot of that has been on hold during the pandemic in terms of developing an overall strategy, because the strategy that we were working on got, again, submarined. I likely will say submarined 100 times in this conversation. So there's work to be done here as well.
Is this something that, as we're looking toward opening sometime in the next 6 months in a much more sort of typical way, is this something that we should have an idea about how that strategy is going to be moved forward?
Well, I think that one of our goals in the next 6 months or so is to reflect on lessons learned in the past year and pull the positives from them. So synthesizing that with the pre-pandemic plans, like what were we thinking we needed to do in terms of reaching people, and realize now we don't, and then what are the things that we learned in the past year. I think 6 months is enough time for us to put a good dent in this, to come up with a strategy.
So by fall, by the start of school, we should have something that'll be a little bit better flushed out.
Yeah, the only caveat there is that that's with the assumption that things continue to improve.
David.
Just making sure you realize that if
well, we all are aware of the potential pitfalls of what's going forward. But okay, so perhaps this is something that the staff who've been working on this could come to the board and present on in the early fall next year.
Yeah, we could at least give an update if it's not complete.
Okay. Great. The second goal is technology, and it's to improve infrastructure and expand services. We're going to talk about that separately because that really falls under the purview of another committee here, although Josh is here and I hope he can give us an idea about where that stands, because I know he's been working on the new 3-year plan for technology. Goal number 3 was for staffing, hire and retain trained staff necessary to provide superior services. Annually, we were to review salary compression issues, and that's something certainly that the board has been doing with Carla Mullen's help and her personnel committee. It's clearly not something that will ever be finished, but we're in the process of engaging with that issue again now that we've gotten through all 3 years of the first salary compression recovery successfully. Is that right, David?
Yeah, it's finished as of last year, fiscal year 20.
Right.
Of course, with no raises in fiscal year 21, it creates a new set of issues. Nobody had any raises this year. And then, and I'm sure we'll get to it when there's a goal in here about it, but in talking about raising our minimum wage, we're going to start a whole new round of compression issues and how to deal with them. We're going to attempt to address at the bottom of the pay scale both the low pay wage and the compression that comes with changing it to $15 at the same time, but it's going to be a daunting task over the next few years.
Right. But it clearly is something that's being taken in hand.
Yes.
And I know that you and Carla both have been working hard.
Yeah, this is perhaps the top priority. I think my top priority moving forward with, I think a lot of the board would agree, and they haven't actually discussed and made it a priority. It's in this strategic plan, but we should have that discussion within the next several months.
Right. And similarly, pay increase requests to the jurisdictions is something that's reviewed seriously on an annual basis. So I know that we're doing the best we can with that,
Yes.
including providing bonuses to the staff, which is something that we could do this year in lieu of the cost of living increases that we would have hoped to be able to provide. For fiscal year 20, one goal was to develop a customer service statement, and that I believe is completed.
Yeah, it was a little behind schedule, but the board voted on it, I think, in December. It was actually, the process worked out really well. The new customer service committee came up with a draft. We brought it to the board. Board had some good feedback. They took it back, reworked it, brought it back, and the board accepted it.
Good. And so one of the next steps would be to try to make that publicly available in all of the branches.
Yeah, the idea was to print it, or maybe not even print, maybe some nice sort of mounted lettering behind public service desk areas.
Right. Still no plans for that at this point.
Not at this point.
Okay.
Aspirational. Jane Kulo used to say.
Aspirational. That's such a good word.
Yeah.
The next thing was to form customer service committees to standardize regional customer service goals. And I know that that really was put back. Has the committee begun actually working on that aspect now?
Yeah, that committee has been meeting. They were on some hiatus when we were in tier 5 and tier 4, but they have been meeting since the fall, basically, to start work on long-term planning.
Okay. Is there a time when we would expect some of that to be presented to the board so that we can see the progress?
Well, that's the board's discretion there, when you would like to see that. I don't think that we should expect much progress at this point. These are all very busy individuals, but you're talking about what the regional customer service goals are going to be, because their focus was on the customer service statement, and now the focus is on working on a customer service manual for staff.
Right. Okay. So presumably the service goals will be part of that manual, correct?
Yes. So it could be a presentation on, what's the content of that manual. And right, I think fiscal year 20, obviously fiscal year 20 is gone. So if we're talking about reorganizing priorities, I think that one likely would have to be pushed until we have more time available, until our multiple service models that we have going on right now start to calm down a little bit, so that those folks can focus on this.
So we'll put that as hopefully starting to come into some sort of clear vision in 22.
Sure. Yeah, 22 is great.
All right. And it's the same with integrating the customer service philosophy into the training manuals. I know that that's something that will be part of that whole process.
Yes.
The last goal for 20 was to evaluate the need for a staff personnel manual and to create said manual. We clearly did not do that in fiscal year 20, in part because of changes in the board, but that's currently actively underway. And I hope that that will be something, again, that can be moved to fiscal year 22. But we should have significant progress on it by then.
Yes.
For fiscal year 21, we had proposed to update the staff training plan. Where are we with that, David?
That's complete. The training committee has finished the update of the staff training plan. Meredith, do you want to say anything about that? She was in charge of the subcommittee that worked on it.
Just what David said, we did. The training committee came up with revised the training program, and it was presented to staff at the regional in-service day late last year, and we continually update it. We're adding training opportunities as they arise.
Okay, great. That's wonderful. Early. Develop a plan for increased staffing needed to maintain at Nelson or increase at Northside and Louisa our service hours. That's obviously something that's been on hold because of budget constraints.
I think so. 3 separate issues there, basically. Nelson, we're working on, and we're working with Nelson County on staffing levels at the Nelson Memorial Library. Louisa, I think, is at capacity for service hours now at 48. So I don't think that there are any plans in the immediate future to add any more on top of that. And that happened, I think, since this goal went in. Northside, we did have a plan going into last year to raise total hours to 60. And the funding fell through when the pandemic hit. But even prior to that, we had some feedback from the county that potentially they would be more interested in a different configuration of hours than what JMRL is looking at. So I think part of this is not just to secure funding for it, but to really come up with a needs assessment for where those hours need to be at Northside, because it is at this point the busiest JMRL library. So we want to make sure we get that right rather than just say, oh, we're going to tack on, we're going to add a half an hour every day and then we're up to 60 hours. We want to make sure that we meet the needs of the patrons there.
So again, once we get through this budget season, presumably that's something that can come into focus for fiscal year 22.
Yes.
Great. And then the final thing under staffing was to develop plans to encourage innovation by staff. How had that come along, David?
I think the only takeaway from this was that we offered what was supposed to be a hybrid, send us your great ideas and any other feedback form, but it was too broad. And it's morphed into just kind of not necessarily ideas about like, here's an idea for new service, but it's more the feedback that I get now is here's an idea for how to improve a current service. So that's innovation, but it's not exactly, I think, what the goal was looking for here. So I think we need to go back to the drawing board on this to figure out, how to really engage staff. And this has been a tremendously difficult year for library staff. What encourages innovation? A global pandemic. There has been a tremendous amount of innovation this year by staff in terms of like figuring out new service models and figuring out what the needs that we really can meet during these constraints are. So in terms of when the dust settles, a way to engage staff to really think about things like this planning process, but just on a staff level, I think we need to go back to the drawing board a little bit. But unfortunately, yeah, I think that's likely on hold until we're on the other side.
Okay, so on this one, we're running to keep in place.
Yeah.
And again, this is something that hopefully we can get back into in fiscal year 22.
Sure.
The next goal was for the collection to be strengthened in a variety of media. Annually, it was proposed to review and develop plans for enhanced financial support of collection development. Who wants to speak to that? Meredith or David?
I can speak likely to the success of funding on a statewide level, which I've kept the board abreast of, but there have been big gains made in the last 3 years relatively big gains made in the state funding, the state aid to public libraries. Several $1 million for the whole state a few years ago, and then coming into this upcoming year, an additional $1 million statewide. So JMRL sees the second largest percentage of that. And I'm on the VLA legislative committee, so work on that pretty closely. And we've been able to reach out to individual trustees and friends groups in our region, in the JMRL region, to reach out to their elected officials to help make that happen. It's been very successful. Next year, we're a bit unsure about fiscal year 21, basically. There's some confusion as to what the state budget's going to end up as. And Meredith, I don't know that we've actually landed on a number there yet from the state, but there have been good gains here in the last few years. I think one of my goals for this goal was to educate our jurisdictions too on what the lack of state aid funding does for their costs. That if we can't keep up with the increasing costs for collection materials, we're going to have to turn back to our jurisdictions and say, hey, we need more funding for this. So successfully we convinced or worked with Albemarle County rather for them to add this to their legislative package 2 years ago, which I think really helped push some of those things through when the state hears not just from libraries, but from the jurisdictions to say, hey, we need help with this or else it becomes a local problem.
Okay. Meredith, is there anything that you had wanted to add? Because I know you've been working.
Not on this specific topic. No, I think David summed it up really well.
Okay. The one thing that I would add is that we found in Nelson that we had an incredibly successful fundraising privately within the community. And much of that was targeted toward developing support for the collection as well as computer access and other sorts of AV equipment. So it's something that could be looked at in the context of this, as well as some of the other goals that were in the 5-year plan, as a way of enhancing what we have available to us outside of government funding.
And I think the rework that the Friends did of the endowment funds a few years ago really opens up that possibility too, which is what Marcy and Susan and the Grow Nelson group used in order to add to that collection there. And that was pretty good proof of concept.
It was great, actually. And I think the community really feels good and is much more invested in the library because they've really put their money into it too. And then annually also, we were going to evaluate new materials that might be needed to support state SOLs. Are SOLs still going to be there? I think that's the question.
I can say, I mean, that is an annual thing that the selectors are aware of, and it's good to have it reminded every year. This year also, we were aware of changing needs when a lot of people were schooling at home and virtually, and so it's to enhance the collection to support all ways of learning is a good reminder. Yeah.
So maybe we need to just revise the wording there.
I think it encompasses, it's the spirit is to support whatever educational goals in the community. Yeah.
Okay, great. For fiscal year 20 in particular, obviously the Nelson Library renovation expansion was completed successfully. And again, can't say enough good things about David and the staff that worked on that. The next thing was to develop and implement a sustainable plan to enhance the digital collection. Meredith, how are we doing with that?
I'm not sure exactly what our end goal looked like when we wrote this, because the word sustainable in terms of digital collection is difficult, especially again, this year has changed usage patterns, and the marketplace for digital materials continues to be dynamic. There's the costs just keep going up, and the usage keeps going up, and we're constantly struggling to meet that, but we are. It's a goal to continue.
Can I, Meredith, you want to hear the full goal?
Oh yeah, thank you. I only have
the full goal says in fiscal year 20, develop and implement a sustainable plan for offering circulating digital media such as film and music through the e-library.
Oh, right. So that was definitely getting into the media. And yeah, we have implemented Canopy, which offers video. We can say through Vault, it's not a credit to us, but we are seeing a streamline of platforms. RB Digital, which was one of the major providers, was acquired by Overdrive. So we actually took 2 of our platforms and made them into one. I mean, they did it for us. But I think that is increasing access and awareness of our offerings.
And making it easier for people to know where to go.
Exactly, and easier to adopt a platform when you only have one thing to learn. You just and the platforms are getting easier to use all the time.
I think the thing that really struck me about that aim, though, was the sustainability goal, and I know that's been an increasing concern because of the rising costs.
Exactly, and that's something that we have to keep in mind when we adopt new platforms or new services, exactly how sustainable they are. That's something we're looking at Canopy. We we decided to try it out and see, because it is cost per use, right? So enhanced use means more cost. Can we sustain that? Right now we are.
And this is another one that the shutdown really changed this goal, I think, because one, at the tail end of last year, we couldn't get any physical materials in, tail end of last fiscal year. So from March basically and through the end of June, correct me if I'm wrong, Meredith, but almost the entirety of the book budget at that point was spent on digital materials. And then that carried over a little bit into this year. And if you look at the circulation numbers for this past year, you'll see that pre-pandemic, we would say that if the digital library was a branch, a physical branch, it would be our fourth busiest. Well, this past year, it's been by far our busiest. You know, most of the circulation we're doing is out of that digital storehouse there. So, you know, the careful balance that Meredith and the selectors had for like, okay, well, we can spend kind of this amount on digital and this amount on that. It kind of tipped the other way for this year, and we're going to have to figure out where the needle lands moving forward on what the balance is again. But still, the competition for those dollars is fierce.
And
It's true.
It may not be clear exactly how the balance in usage
Wow.
comes out once people begin using the system more openly.
Yes, I think a lot of people who adopted digital in this year when they had no other choice are going to continue using it, but there's still plenty of demand for print materials or physical materials.
Right.
So I think most of our sustainability comes from our flexibility of our being able to watch what's available and change our spending as we need to. So we try and stay as flexible as possible with our spending.
Okay, thanks. The next one for fiscal year 20 was to update and revise the collection management plan.
That has not been done yet because this year changed all of our needs and availabilities and priorities. That was put off, but I do anticipate that it'll be done by the end of this fiscal year with the perspective gained in the last year.
Okay, so in 20.
That's solely on my shoulders, by the way.
I know it is. I know it is. I was sort of putting it down as fiscal year 22, but
Great. It's every time I look at it, I think, well, I would really love things to settle down and know what things are going to look like when we're open back up again before I, commit to again, priorities and procedures. But it remains a goal.
okay.
And I will say that the plan itself is a very robust and not very old plan. I mean, the last revision, it's time to look at it, but it's in pretty good shape as it is. So it's still something that we're using on a daily basis.
Right. It's something that the board looked at pretty carefully with Meredith not too long ago.
Yeah.
Before the ceiling fell in.
Yeah, when it's on my shoulders to put this in this year or that last year as well. And I remember thinking, well, that seems early, but I'm going to be proactive about updating it. So even if we get to it next year, it's still within the 5-year sort of standard revision schedule for the industry. So that's what I tell myself.
No. I think
I agree with you.
All right.
For this year, the proposal was that the ESL learning materials would be reevaluated and possibly updated. Has anything happened there? Have you been able to work on that, Meredith, or is that something that's had to go?
That is something that has had to go. That is pretty much a physical collection, and because it was less accessible this year, then I worry about doing an analysis on the performance of that collection based on the benchline. We had a benchmark. I did a collection analysis 3 years ago. We were going to look at it again after trying to develop the collection to see whether it was being used. And again, this year usage is not a good standard. I do think that we should take a look at it and also start to talk to members in the community to make sure that they are getting what they need, rather than not just look at circulation. So I do anticipate starting that process by the end of this fiscal year, if not completing it.
Okay. I was sort of the year 22 to 23 by the time things really are moving back.
Yeah, again, I think because we do want to make sure people can get in our buildings and see what's there, but we also maybe want to move some of it online as well. So so pushing that forward is in the future is good.
How would you get community feedback on this, Meredith?
One of our primary, I think, users, we are in touch with the literacy volunteers in Charlottesville specifically. Their tutors are an active group, and we can approach them to say, you know, I get, for instance, anecdotally, I get purchase suggestions from some of the tutors who are working with ESL students, adult students, and so approaching them, and also the education folks in our jurisdictions who work with ESL students of all ages, just to make sure that we have resources that they can use.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions or comments about this particular goal regarding the collection?
I think our collection is in great shape. There's always room for improvement, but I really feel like our collection is in about as good a shape as it's been in for a long time. And, you know, funny, but part of that has to do with the time that folks had to work on it during the past year or two. You know, we've been talking a lot amongst the managers about this new weeding program that we're doing with Baker and Taylor, but, you know, staff really had a chance to review and look through their collections in a way that they don't when the doors are open and kids are running in and they need help with the computer and this and that. So kudos to Meredith and to everybody involved in keeping our collection in good shape.
Thank you all so much, because I think in the same way that David suggested that the pandemic can also be a great motivator for innovation, it's also been a nice way to pause and look at the collection. I think you're absolutely right, David, that sometimes this work needs space and time for it, and that's one thing that the crisis has provided.
Yeah.
Great. Goal number 5 was related to finance. Specifically, the proposal was to try to secure funding to earn a EE rating or whatever that is these days. Right, exactly. Annually, we were going to evaluate and update plans to acquire funding mandated by the state code, and that's something I know David and several others have been working on really hard, and as he said earlier, have made some good progress on. Mm-hmm. Another one is to work with the boards of the outlying jurisdictions to try to help support the individual library branches at something closer to a full support status. That's been really difficult with the pandemic, and I know it's something that will continue to be worked on, but this probably still isn't the year to be pushing there very much. And then to work with local jurisdictions and importantly with regional school systems to support their goals for library service. Again, the schools have been struggling with their own problems this year, so it's been something that I'm sure has had to be put on hold except for individual cases. But Susan or anybody who's had contact perhaps with some of the school libraries, has there been any progress there that we can report to the board?
I know we've continued to share materials with them for the children. I know we did a lot of donations when they did curbside pickup for food. And we continue here at Nelson to talk with all the libraries about programs that we're doing and how we can do as much as we can to support what they are doing. So we continue that relationship with the Nelson County school system.
I know we've had staff to virtually attend the virtual schooling in order to promote library resources for kids as well. I know that anecdotally, my wife is a school librarian, and she had a librarian from Northside come and tell the kids what's available online, and it was a big success. I think part of this goal too was to try, and when Jay Morrell is talking about Jay Morrell's budget priorities, make sure that they're in line with what the jurisdictional budget priorities are. So we always try to look through strategic plans for our jurisdictions, and you know, when it comes to areas like quality of life or services and things like that, try to tie our language in with that to show value. And I will say, Marcy, you're correct in that this has been a difficult budget year for local jurisdictions, but all of them have expressed a lot of gratitude towards towards JMorale, the library board, JMorale staff for being able to provide services. And they always mention, you know, how high their citizens feel, or the residents feel, that the quality of service that they're getting from JMRL. So when Albemarle does their annual surveys, it's always in one of the top percentiles for most appreciated or most used services. So while last year the model was so different and continues to be different, I think the support from our local jurisdictions has never been stronger. The money end of it is trailing that a little bit, but we're working on it.
Another project to mention with working with the regional school systems is the Parent Resource Center collection that we're about to unveil. The Albemarle County School Special Ed Department had a collection of resources for parents and families of their students that was underutilized. So we're working with them to make those materials and refresh that collection and make them available through JMRL. And that's been a really great partnership. I think the folks at the schools who are working with us are more aware of what we offer, and we're definitely more aware of what they offer. And it's been a great collaboration.
And those, right, Meredith, the ones that will be those can circulate, the ones that will actually be housed at JMRL. So that's really going to expand it to the entire region.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
And Albemarle County Public Schools were very supportive of that too. You know, they could have taken the mindset that we want these to only be available for Albemarle kids, and that would have been a problem for JMRL. But all along, they said, "Great, we want them available for everybody in the community, in the wider community."
Great. Well, that's a real win. This
Yeah, it's been nice.
Yeah, I think, and I hope that it paves the way for other projects like that. That'd be great.
In finance for fiscal year 21, which is where we are, there was the proposal to explore alternatives to out of area fees. How is that going, David? Is there any point in even discussing this at this point?
Well, and again, this is hard coded into the regional agreement. So doing away with these requires getting all 5 jurisdictions to agree with that, and this gets brought up annually in the meeting with the jurisdictions. And there's always at least one jurisdiction that doesn't want to turn revenue away, no matter how small it is. And it has been, in most years, it's not bringing in nearly the funding that was intended when this was enacted about 10 years ago. This year, especially, I think it has not brought in the funding because people aren't coming in physically to use the library. So I think what we had in mind here, Marcy, was either trying to go to the endowment to subsidize part of this, or to work with the jurisdictions to come up with some exceptions, like maybe for teachers that work in JMRL's service area but live outside of it. We would be able to provide a waiver of some sort, or maybe have the Friends subsidize that, similar to what they do with Scottsville. So I think that there are ways to do this, but it's going to cost money, and that money likely would have to come from the Friends, and the Friends are pinching pennies right now as well.
As are we all, yes. So this, we'll just call it on hold until the situation resolves itself one way or the other. We can say.
You know, it's as one of the unfortunate instigators of this thing in the first place. I think it ought to stay on the 5-year plan, and we ought to, as David says, we ought to keep bringing it up annually, with probably the hope of wearing down the jurisdictions in the long run. But
yeah, the last time we discussed it, the Albemarle gets the largest share of this money back, and they were okay with figuring out a way to kind of balance this out or write this off. It was the smaller jurisdictions who aren't getting a lot of money, but they just don't want to say no to any revenue stream, regardless of the size of it. So I agree with Tony. You know, we need to keep this on the radar, but likely it won't be finally taken care of until the regional agreement is opened up again.
And David, is that on a schedule?
It's reviewed every 5 years, but in terms of reopening that has to come from the jurisdictions.
Okay, so we can't initiate that kind of thing.
No, I mean, we can have a discussion saying we would like to see this happen. And I'm sure, you know, there are things that they would always like to talk about, but we can't say it's going to happen. We need the jurisdictions to say that.
And it really is a very broad mandate to look at lots of different things about the way the system functions. So it's
Correct.
a little bit of a time bomb.
Yeah.
Okay, develop and implement a fundraising plan. That clearly is on hold this year.
On hold. Yes. Yes, it is on hold. So we've learned some things in the past year or so, fundraising for Nelson. We have fine-tuned the communication and the capacity between the Friends and JMRL. So I think that there are definitely some things that we could get down on paper now that we have learned. I know Carla and I have had a lot of talk about kind of planned giving and ways to reach out to some resources in our community. But nothing has been committed to paper here. So no, this goal is effectively at the starting line.
If it's at the starting line and we don't really see an interval where that's going to become something that can be a priority, is it worth just putting that sort of permanently on hold until we can get the resources together to come back to that?
Well, I think that we should move it out of fiscal year 21 and revisit it next spring. I don't think, through the life of the plan, this should be a priority for the organization, to figure out ways to supplement the revenue streams that we have. And not just in a very specific way, like for Nelson, but in a more general, revitalize the collection, those types of ways.
Right.
So I would be comfortable moving this out of fiscal year 21 and then checking on progress next year to see. So if it was in fiscal year 22 or 23.
Okay. So we'll look at revisiting this in 22 and hopefully really setting something up in 23.
Yeah. And the full goal, again here, the full goal is very fleshed out. It includes looking at an annual calendar for fundraising, which I think is a good idea to kind of figure out like what local grant timelines, the types of stuff, Marcy, that you became very familiar with Grow Nelson, like when the Nelson Community Fund applications are due, when the Bama Works is due, things like that.
Right. And probably having somebody who feels as if they're responsible for some of this.
Yeah, that's been the problem. And the last 5-year plan before this one included a development officer as part of the ask. And I think JMRL gave up trying on that, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't in the future be revisited.
Okay. Well, perhaps establishing a very small focused committee, perhaps of patrons rather than library staff.
Yeah, or
might
friends.
be something to, there's certainly expertise in the community.
Yeah.
On fundraising. Okay, goal number 6 was facilities. There really wasn't an annual.
Pardon me,
Yes,
Marcy.
Lisa?
I couldn't get to my unmute button in time. I was thinking that as we were talking about all the fundraising that we could do in Charlottesville, there's also, the Center for Nonprofit Excellence. They have someone that specializes also in generating survey questions. So this is like a way to turn back a little bit to the question about evaluating program through surveys. So just again, as we start to look to other ways to, to conduct certain functions or to generate certain information, that could be another place to reach out for support around, generating those kind of questions to generate the data. But again, you all are also librarians, so I think you know how to do everything. But if you wanted some support around that, there are the Center for Nonprofit Excellence might be able to offer some support about that.
That's great.
There is a cost associated with that.
Yes.
I mean, the library has actually been a participant in that in the past. I don't think we're active, are we, David?
I believe we are not currently active, but
That's right. It's a subscription service for, that's right. Oh, well, maybe it's a scam. I don't know.
Lisa,
But
Yeah,
we
but
have
I think that if we do something like that costs money, we better have some pretty firm goals in mind.
True enough.
Yeah, the board should talk about that because they also offer a lot of board training and things. Like there are some great resources there because VLA just got a subscription for smaller libraries. They subsidized the subscription. Jamrell did not qualify, and they sent out a list of what was available, and it was pretty impressive. So it's something that we should probably look into.
But again, I think something that we can develop our own ideas about what we want to pursue first.
Sure.
Make sure that whatever organization we approach would be able to handle those things well. So again, fiscal year 20, the Nelson Memorial Library was nearly completed, opened in the summer, just after the end of the fiscal year. And in 21, the proposal was to develop a working group to look toward the renovation of the central library. And again, I know that that has had to go onto the back burner. David, do you have a plan for that in mind?
Yeah, two things about that. One, the goal here was to try to engage staff both in the city and the county using the model that Crozet used. When the community there first started talking about renovating the library, they were able to get Albemarle County staff as part of their planning group, and that helped with the buy-in process there. So the Friends and Jamrell have been talking about putting together something like this for a while. And when Tony was president of the Friends, actually, we were talking about this. And then second, the work that has been happening has been piecemeal. Jamrell has seen some great improvements at the Central Library, including a renovation of all the restrooms. And currently they're putting, what is it called, Krista? A new chiller in the building. Yes, thank you. So part of what we have done in the last few years is work with the city to get the smaller scale capital projects through, because it's been made very clear to us that currently the CIP is not going to support a full renovation of the central library. And this is on the city's end, basically, and the county likely would say something very similar. So right now, the plan is to continue to engage with them. There is in their kind of mid-level CIP interior finishes. And when is that, Krista? Is that next year?
Yeah, when we met with RJ, he was talking about that as in the next year or two. But again, with revenues and the pandemic, everything is,
I think that's
prioritized.
Yeah, but I believe that those finishes are in that budget. So that'll be some nice cosmetic things, paint and just sprucing it up a bit. In terms of the overall structure, I mean, JMRL has put pretty significant resources into it as well. Josh he always has a group come in and do some rewiring for us in order to add new access points and things like that to provide coverage throughout the building. But in terms of the overall renovation, we're looking at, Tony, how long has this project been in the kind of development phase?
I remember it from my first board meeting in 2003, David.
Yeah, and likely it was already being discussed before that. So we have yet to, I think, reach a critical mass of political will on this, where there are people in the community that are reaching out to the city council and the board of supervisors to say, this is a priority and a need. So all the jurisdictions are only hearing it from the library for the most part. So yes, I would be very interested in getting this thing going, working with the Friends to get this going. I think that one thing that we can do now that we couldn't do in 2003 is come with the weight of that endowment and say, JMRL is when the Friends are willing to really kick off a major fundraising campaign. And there's some seed money right there ready to go.
Good. Well, thanks. I think, as David said when he looked at this, it's been remarkable how much has been done despite all of the interruptions and chaos over the last year. So congratulations to everybody. And we'll try to move forward. I'll make a summary for the board meeting, David.
Josh, did you want to say anything about the tech plan?
That's what I was going to ask you to do next.
Yeah.
If you and Josh could bring us up to date on how things are going with the new technology plan.
I can't see Josh's face anymore. Maybe I'll stop sharing. Is that okay?
I think that's great.
The tech plan. So the TAC committee met for the second time this past Monday. We have a what I consider like a 95% complete draft of the tech plan. It's in very good shape, except for some wordsmithing and maybe one or two bullet points out of the roughly 40 to 50 that we have that need to have some questions about them. I expect that within about 2.5 weeks, that committee will have a formally approved tech plan. What we're doing right now is the committee is spending the next 2 weeks or so doing the wordsmithing, making sure those couple of bullet points with questions are those questions are being answered. And then we're going to have a kind of an email vote to make sure that it's approved. We had a tacit approval on Monday, so this will be the final real approval in about 2.5 weeks. I think you'll see the full thing, soon. I think the biggest technology project that we have on the horizon is desktop virtualization, which is going to be completely restructuring the way all public and staff PCs work, rather than each device being an independent, device that is sitting on the desk and is operating just kind of into itself, having a centralized management system so that the IT department can more easily and quickly manage what has gone from, I don't know, somewhere around 200 devices maybe 5 years ago to something closer to 400 to 450 devices now. It'll make life a lot easier on our IT department, that's for sure, and life a lot easier for our staff in general. So that's one of the big examples of one of the big changes that we're planning for this coming fiscal year. Are there any questions about that process or anything else I can highlight? Yeah.
So Josh, 2 to 3 weeks for that, and then we can call the board. We can ask
Yes.
Wendy to call the board technology committee to review that, and then they'll go through the same process basically. So
Correct.
I would think, Marcy, that a new plan would be, so what month is it?
This is March, David.
Potentially maybe by the April board meeting, but if not by the May board meeting, the full board should be able to approve Josh's plan that he just described.
Okay, good. Josh, how are things coming with the website?
Well, David, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so I will share with the full board in a few weeks here, but our digital services coordinator is leaving JMRL. We're very happy for her. She is going on to get further education at the University of Auburn or Auburn University, one or the other. But it leaves us in a bit of a no man's land where we were finishing up, we're working with a local organization, Braid, for to fine tune the Drupal, the kind of back end of this. But with Catherine leaving, we're likely going to have to delay launching until we get somebody on board that's comfortable with the infrastructure that's been built. So we're looking at a potential delay, I would think, in putting out the beta website, making it live.
Yes, I can give you a couple more details about what's really happening as Catherine is leaving. The two big projects, the Viewfind project is going to stay there. The new catalog, that is going to stay live and accessible to the public. Catherine is basically turning over all documentation to me for management of that until we get the new person in place. She's going to do something very similar with the new website. She's running all updates on it right now so they can kind of sit there in a stable until we can get a new person in place. We have been working with that third-party company for advice and potentially for help with server maintenance and potentially website maintenance. So that is a door that we could open. But yes, what David said, it'll really depend on who follows Catherine and how quickly we can get that person in place. Really hoping we can get somebody with the Drupal skills necessary to roll the website out relatively quickly after they start, but it remains to be seen with who we get.
Is there a timeline there?
We're posting the position now. We're hoping to have a little bit, I'm hoping to have a little bit of training period with those people in before Catherine leaves in April. So hopefully we'll have the new person on board by the end of April, but that's being optimistic.
Okay.
But I'm optimistic, so.
It is spring. Does anyone have any further comments, questions, concerns about?
Welcome to Prol. Prol is here now, Marcy, and I couldn't make him an attendee while we were screen sharing, but.
Welcome.
You're muted though if you're talking, Prol.
Sorry I was so late joining. I just got out of class. So I got part of the discussion on part 5 and part 6. So
Don't worry, we're recording and we'll post, so you can.
Lucky you. Anyone else have any other comments, questions, concerns?
Thank you, Marcy, for picking this up.
Well,
Without a
good
chair.
job, everybody. And we'll hope that next spring's review is easier, that we have more to show even than we did this year. Unless there is a concern about anything else, I'll just adjourn this meeting without a vote.
Thank you, Marcy.